rejoining the race, and the leaders are at the far side of the course on their second lap.
Yes, and Foord and Baker have lifted the tempo and moved over 30 seconds clear of the chasers, and at the same time have dropped the BMW Proflex rider Guy, who's in his first year as a pro. And though he's got the speed, he doesn't yet seem to have the stamina. In fact, he appears to be working hard to stay with Early and Clark. And now Craig and Gould are beginning to move through the field after their poor starts, and are now ahead of Timmis. Here are the current positions as former national cyclo-cross champion Steve Dowse heads Martin through. Foord and Baker are looking very comfortable at the moment, and you can see how much smoother they are through the twisty single track than Early. However, the Irishman has moved away from his teammate, who's been joined by Gould and Craig. In the women's race, though, it's all splitting up. Smith seems to be gradually extending her lead on the long climbs and fast sections through the national showground, which means she's now out of sight of the chasing duo of Morell and Robinson, who'll need to share the work if they're to bridge the gap to the Canadian. However, they've reduced their numbers by dropping Roberts. She doesn't like the early fast pace, and is only just now ahead of Ward. Up the hostile terrain out of the quarry woods, and Smith is pouring on the pressure. She really knows how to attack these ascents, and at the moment Robinson and Morell have got no answer to the flying Canadian. On the main climb of the penultimate lap, Baker and Foord are still well clear, and they're working together to secure their lead. Foord took a couple of tumbles in the woods, but Baker didn't bother to attack. Gould and Clark are now battling it out for third, although at the moment it looks like Gould, the Schwinn rider, is doing the lion's share of the work. They've moved clear of Early and Craig, though, whose pre-season knee injury is standing up well. Back through Llaneled Woods, and now it's Foord who's gone to the front. They're both using the slight downhill actually to take a drink, for even on an overcast day with a chilling wind there'll be a great loss of body fluids. They're maintaining a comfortable lead over the chasing duo of Gould and Clark, and this means on the descents they can take it slightly easier to find a safer line. And Early seems to have again found power on the climbs as he's dropped Craig, who has been caught by Dowse and Martin. You can see how Gould and Clark are having to attack on the descents, for they still haven't given up the chase. While Gary Coltman now comes through to make it 3 rallies in the top 8. This race is obviously going to be decided in the final stages as they near the main climb. And you can see that both the Scot and the GT rider are beginning to take a breather. They want to avoid the gamble of a sprint finish, and one will be trying to give the other the slip. There's the lead, a handsome cushion of over 1.5 minutes now to their nearest challengers. In the women's race, Smith is still out front, but she must have really tired on her third lap as the gap has come down behind her. Morell's now on her own as Robinson's crashed and had to retire. And Deb now has the Canadian in view, while the Welsh rider Roberts appears to have got her second win and is now coming back into contention. On the climb, Baker's having a little dig here, but Ford's not an easy man to crack. And Clark, the British cyclo-cross champion, taking a drink, looks stronger than Gould at this stage, who takes a sneaky look back at one of the lapped riders. Smith now seems to be losing her composure on the climbs when she made light work of them in the early stages. And in the back of the picture, you can see the Saracen rider is only seconds behind. That'll give Morell a target, but if she looks round, she'll see that Roberts is rapidly closing the gap as well. The Welsh rider is notorious for her strong finishing, and I'm sure that the locals here in Builth Wells will be cheering her all the way. Meanwhile, Craig has gone clear in 5th spot, as early as blown and dropped out of the top 10. So the Irish challenge will now rest with Martin, who's still riding with Dowse, while Angela Ward is now in 4th and unchallenged. Both Clark and Gould are internationally renowned for their climbing ability. I bet that lap rider is suffering to try and stay with them. And true to the form books, Craig completes the top 5. Heading down for the final time, Baker and Foord are still inseparable. Now, they've clashed on previous occasions twice, and they're 1-1 when it comes to a sprint finish. And this one looks as though it's going to go down to the wire as well. Just as close is the tussle behind for 3rd and 4th. Now, Clark is the stronger sprinter here, so Gould will need to give Clark the slip before the end if he wants a podium spot. Looping round the back of the finish arena, and Foord has now made his break. Struggling a little bit to get his gears right, but it doesn't seem to matter. Baker looks resigned to second now. He's obviously suffering from jet lag, whereas this man, Gary Foord, has shook the jet lag off very well. That's a lap rider behind, so don't get confused. The gap is now beginning to stretch out over this man, David Baker, who now seems to have settled for that runner-up position. Just a little back wheel skip there from the GT rider, but no mistaking the victor. It's the popular Gary Foord, and he comes home to tremendous applause from the big crowd here in Builth. David Baker then, just in his wake for the runner-up spot. But back on the descent, the battle for 5th is really now hotting up. Martin now having caught and passed Craig, and the women's race is coming down to a 3-way tussle. Smith is still in the lead with 1.5 miles to go, but she's now being put under pressure by Roberts, and Morell is also taking closer order. And over the closing stages, it was Clark who proved the stronger. The popular gutsy bike rider who rides for Raleigh finally came home for 3rd, and Tim Gould, another man that's loved by the crowds for his mountain bike exploits, waves as he comes in for 4th. And the same was true in the women's events, with Roberts pulling away through the national showground for a home win that certainly pleased her. Smith, the race long leader, finally surrendered that lead to Roberts just as they approached the finish and came home 2nd, while the plucky Morell ended the day 3rd. What a race.
So Sian took first blood in what was probably the closest women's finish we've had in Britain, while Angela Ward was only a couple of minutes off the pace. And not surprisingly, on such a fast course, it was close results throughout the men's field, though Foord and Baker definitely had the edge here. And the first points have been won for the series, but Jill Smith, being a Canadian, doesn't collect any, so Deb picks up the 2nd position's 13 points. While in the men's overall, 5 of the top 6 places are occupied by riders who will miss some races for their international commitments. So how did they feel about the season opener?
Well, I didn't feel good beforehand, so perhaps I went into it with the right attitude that I'll see how it goes, and we just seemed to pull away so easily, and we got a nice gap, and then we actually didn't really attack each other until the last lap, and I came out on top. There wasn't too much cat and mouse, and David actually said he was a little bit tired, so he was just trying to get through the race anyway. I was on a good day, and you've got to take advantage of that. 2nd would have been disappointing today.
I thought it was better to try hard on the first lap and make everyone suffer, and then what's happening throughout the rest of the race. And we got that gap, and we just worked together, and we're quite happy riding together as a unit. I could tell that he was the strongest from the end of the first lap, beginning of the 2nd lap. I knew that he was stronger than what I was riding, so I was quite happy to stay with him until the last lap.
It's only who crosses the line that makes the difference. I was hanging on Tim for most of the race, and the last lap I think he was suffering a bit more than I was, and managed to get a bit of a gap on one of the rises, and that was it really. I'm sure he'd do the same to me, so we all get on quite well, so that's the way it goes.
Last year I was next to nowhere this time of year, so I was quite pleased with 4th in the end. I rode quite a hard race. I was in 3rd a lot of the time, and they had towed Barry around, so perhaps I'll get my bonus in a couple of weeks' time from trying so hard.
It's very, very different in Britain to have such a close race. In the women's race, we're usually very spread out, but there's only a few seconds between the first three. It was really tight at the finish there. I didn't really think I'd get them back, to be honest, but last lap I was just like catching up all the time, so my usual flurry at the finish. For the first lap I was doing most of the work at the front, and I think that killed me off a bit. When Deb and Louise went past, I couldn't go with them, so I took a couple of laps to recover and then sort of picked the pace up again.
I normally try to go quite hard at the start because I tend to do better at the beginning of races and then sort of fade near the end, but the girls are so fit, Sian and Deb, that I couldn't get enough of a gap today, and so it came back together at the end, and ended up almost being a sprint finish.
I think on the last lap the pace just went through the roof. Once we all came back together again, it was absolutely flat out. You know, there was just nobody was given an inch. But perhaps my good patch was a bit too early because Sian's came a bit later and she just had a bit more left at the finish, I think.
They'll line up again next week as the series moves north to Yorkshire.